I'm calling this the fall garden V-Rant, as in video rant. Little romantic filter on there, that's what it's called. Should be hitting slow-mo right about, there we go. I just built those 2 extra boards on this raised bed and transplanted some lettuce plants. Now it's still technically summer until next week, but I had planted some fall plants like radishes, cilantro, and what we're seeing here are these wilty lettuce plants. They're wilted because I transplanted them and watered them, and the water got on them. Was really hot. Beautiful blue sky day today, sunny. I was doing outdoor work. I had to do some concrete patching by my garage. I put these 2 boards on to keep the critters out of this bed. Next year I'm going to add like another, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches of dirt to this particular bed. But I'm showing these because probably, most likely, hopefully, these will be the next time you see and hear me on YouTube. These things should be nice, healthy lettuce plants. They'll recover. They should recover. It's cool in the evenings, and they get sunlight in the daytime. But there's this big mutant marigold plant that is as thick as a tree and as tall as a person that will shade them later on in the day so they don't get too much sun. So this I've got high hopes. You can see a little poblano pepper dangling down there at the top of the screen towards the left. See that? I had really good luck with peppers this year. Yeah, look how thick. This is a marigold plant. Look how thick that is. The bees took a marigold plant last year and they must have cross-pollinated it with some kind of like 6-foot tall wildflower. And that's what you get. This is a close-up of the wood I put in today. This one piece that just hangs up a little bit too high on the edge, I'll saw that down level with the other boards. This is back in my patio near my garage / workshop, place where I hang out and sit in the sun, and I don't know, I have a little grill next to this, and my little makeshift, it's like a 4x4 greenhouse that's like currently 120 degrees inside, would be behind us if we were, from our point of view. So that's enough with the garden for now. Let's get on to happiness. I don't know if I specifically got much into this, but if I did in previous videos, it bears repeating, that's for sure. The thing I notice now, more than anything, with people in general, is unhappiness among the people who you would think would be the most happiest. Such as the wealthy, the entertainers, the people in media. But these people that, are on the streets, have no jobs, but apparently have income because they're, drinking Starbucks coffee and I guess hanging out with their parents' allowance, even though they're 29 or 35 years old. I don't know. apologize for the trucks passing by. I'm in the front of my house right now, and sometimes this street becomes a thoroughfare, even though the speed limit, it's a neighborhood and the speed limit is 25. These large trucks come up at like 60 miles an hour. It's crazy. Anyway, I should be unhappy for that, but I'm not. No, it's like, this the politics of hate that you see everywhere. And they're just angry, bitter people when, like today, when it's when life is beautiful. Again, one would expect somebody who was homeless on the streets of San Francisco, L.A., or New York, or hanging out in Chicago where there's these the high murder rate, or these slums of Baltimore, and all these places that are just out of control, and people are living in abject poverty, sleeping in the streets in tents, all that's. You would expect those people to be unhappy. And, oddly enough, when you do see these people interviewing, those people, aren't filled with anger, hatred, and, this insanity that you see these elitists have. Those people are more, down on their luck, or whatever it is. I mean, I personally feel sorry for them, but I blame the elitists, for not doing anything about it, because what the elitists are unhappy and angry and hateful about has nothing to do with that, because they are ignoring it. The politicians in the House of Representatives, their job is, they represent a district. And there's like 430 some of them, something like that. And each one of those is a specific district in the country. And so their first and foremost responsibility is they're called a representative. It's the House of Representatives, and they are a representative of the people of their district. Sorry for the lesson in history and government, but unlike senators, which are, represent the state itself as a whole. But these representatives, they just are, they're all multimillionaires, and how they've become millionaires on a politician's salary, even though politicians are overpaid, they still can't, it still doesn't justify how they're all multimillionaires. They hardly ever go to work, and when they do, they hold hearings that are all politically based, hating the other side, instead of sitting there and addressing homelessness in their district, or crime in their district. They don't do anything about that. It's like, even when they talk about guns and things like that, it's like it's always something that's so, vague. It's like, I just watched 2 videos this week of these gangs of thugs in these aforementioned cities. They weren't shooting anybody. They were like kicking and beating people, to a pulp, that kind of stuff. So the idea of this hatred, anger, and violence, and the media is right in on this, is is unwarranted in a beautiful world, on a beautiful sunshiny day today, blue sky day, when these people have everything anyone could ask for in the world, and yet they just sit there and they have to play politics, and the politics of hate, instead of trying to improve the life of the people that voted for them. Or they're so ingrained, in this political world that they can't reach across the aisle, or they can't work together with the other party to solve a problem, because they don't want the problem solved, because politically, if they work together, they can't get credit for it. It's pretty crazy. But what it really boils down to is it's still this happiness or lack thereof. Like I've said this before, I basically moved. I lived everywhere. I lived in New York. I lived and worked in New York. I had a good job, and I lived in a penthouse in New York at one time. When I lived in L.A. I lived in Malibu, and I had a beach. It wasn't a beach house. I was up on the on the other side of the PCH, overlooking the ocean. I had ocean view, in one of the canyon um, places. So I could watch the sunset every night from my deck. Yeah, I lived in D.C. I lived in Capitol Hill, lived and worked in Capitol Hill in one of those townhouses, and I could walk to down the mall and hang out at all the places. These are those poblano peppers. These are great. So happy with my peppers this year. I said that before. I've crossed the ocean, so I've over the Atlantic and to London. I've been across the Pacific to Sydney. Yeah, and I've been in Philly. I mean, I've been all over. I've really had, you know, I guess a charmed life, you could say, because it's not like I've lived in any one of these places for like 5, 10 years, but I lived in all of these places for several years. Lived and worked. I was the type of guy who would get a good job, and I would succeed at that job, and I was a problem solver. And usually within a year or two, I would almost make my position obsolete. I would get the place running so well, and I used to really enjoy that. I mean, even I've worked even in I worked as a creative director in an advertising agency. I managed a radio station. The same thing. I loved taking something that wasn't doing well or was close to being at the bottom of somewhere and to bring it up, bring it back to life and get it just become a fine oiled machine, buzzing. So over a fairly, shorter period of time, I've had many successes and I've lived in all of these major markets. Now I moved out of, I don't even think it would be called, I'm outside of what's not even a secondary market. Might be in the top 200 or something like that. But I bought a very inexpensive house. You would call a cheap house. But it had a backyard. Not a big backyard, a small backyard, but a backyard that had this area that was south facing. That's the key if you want to grow things. You want an area that has southern exposure. And so I get the sun in the morning, and it kind of works its way right across my garden, and it's fantastic for growth. In fact, my last video was called Overgrowth, because this time of year, I just did a lot of trimming today, cut a lot of things back, but yeah, this time of year I just kind of let things just get out of control. There's something about just laying in a lounge chair in the sun in late August or early September. Well, it's actually getting to be towards late September now. And just letting the sun beat down on you and being surrounded by all this living things, breathing this fresh air because there's so much green around you that it's pulling in all of the CO2 that so many people are afraid of. Plants love CO2. And it's giving us that oxygen. And I've also read that, plants, leaves that are, especially leaves that are wet, also interfere with things like 5G signals. So I'm letting vines grow up my house, in anticipation of that 5G horror show that's about to be unleashed on people in this country. But happiness, what is happiness? How, there's degrees of happiness. Sometimes it's just a matter of, some for the best for some people is to find a moment of calm, or just where things aren't out of control. And that might be on the low scale of happiness, just what someone would call a day without a problem, or a day where you're not overly stressed. But for other people, you know, happiness, you know, is bliss. Was that saying, follow your bliss. And it's really not that hard to follow your bliss. It just takes a desire to do it, to think about it. You have to contemplate that if you are unhappy, you have to think, what are the things? I always tell people, it's just go back to pencil and paper and make two columns, draw a line down the middle of a sheet of paper. And on the one side, things that make you happy and things that make you unhappy, or your likes and dislikes, whatever you want to call the columns. And just look at it, sometimes you have to visualize it and you have to write it down to see it and see that. And look at your life and say, what are the things you like? What are the things you dislike? What are things about your life that make you happy? And what are the things about your current life that make you unhappy? What are what are the things you wish? What are your dreams, or what would you wish you could do, and what would you rather not do? And this isn't some not idealistic thing. You have to be grounded. You have to be realistic. You don't. It's not like I want to live in a mansion. I want to be a pop star. I mean, I don't believe any goal is, impossible. But, we're talking about just finding happiness. That maybe you just start by the point of finding the things that you don't like, moving away from those, and finding the things you like and try to move toward those. And the thing about it is you can't be impatient when it comes to this. Like for example, in my entire life, I've always been one that I've been patient enough to plan in advance to whenever I've made a change. And a guy like me who's moved, from New York to LA, or from DC to Philly, or, tried to produce a movie in Australia, and traveled across the ocean, the Pacific Ocean 3 times, on like 20 some hour flights. It takes a lot of planning and things in advance to make sure that you just hop on a plane and say, I'm going to go do this thing. I'm going to go move to, I know there are people impetuous like that, and they just get in a car and just wing it. And I have to admit, there are times when I was very young, college age, where I would do things on a whim like that. And sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. But what I'm talking about is happiness and finding happiness. And it's the idea that you have to think it through. Once you make that list, and if you find that there are more things in your life right now that are making you unhappy, and that the things that would make you happy, that list there's like hardly anything there. And I'm not really getting into things like love, for example, or a broken heart, or something like that. I mean, that's obviously will make you very unhappy. But that's a different type of thing altogether. These are things that happen within our lives that it doesn't matter where we are or what type of life we're living. the possibility of emotional uh, unhappiness occurring happens. We can unfortunately lose a friend, a family member, a pet. There are things that happen that, you know, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about things that are within your control. These are bean plants I just planted several weeks ago, and they're coming up as well. My fall crops were beans, radishes, cilantro, and lettuce. That kale on the right by that moth, butterfly, whatever it is, it looks like something out of a Disney movie, an old Disney movie before they became bizarre psycho company. But those were the 4 plants I planted, and they're all coming up. And like I say, I'm hoping that the weather or the lettuce adjusts. It's some kind of bee or something. I sprinkled some water on this overgrown kale, and sometimes you'll get these bugs, various bugs, that just get a drink of those little droplets on the leaf. So let's say you live in a particular place and you have a job, and you either don't like your job or you don't like the place you live in. Now, for some people might say, I don't like where I live and I don't like my job either. Well, we live in a time right now, and who knows, if this is a fleeting moment in time, where there are jobs everywhere, literally. And if you're a person that is caught in a major city or some urban area where you're paying ridiculous amounts of rent, and you have a job that you don't like, or you don't feel secure or safe in that area, or you're just not having fun, you should start exploring the idea of moving out of the city. And I don't mean to the suburbs. I mean moving to another place. Because there are more places in this country. And the media, they don't really cover that. They kind of make anything outside of certain coastal areas like New York, LA, or along those overpriced areas. They make it seem, they call it the flyover states or something. And they make it seem like everyone is some kind of farmer or hick that lives outside of those areas. But the reality is, for the past, I would say, almost half century, since, advanced telecommunications, since the commonality of mass media, mass communications, where society has almost become homogenized, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but I mean culturally, that if you are living in Ohio, Virginia, Pennsylvania, wherever, Oklahoma, Indiana, these places, you could find towns there, and I'm not talking about towns that have a population of 150, though. Quite frankly, I wish I lived in one of those. But you could find places that real estate is so dirt cheap. The communities have just about everything that you can imagine. Like, for example, where I live currently, like I said, it's lucky if it's somewhere in the high. It's not even a top 200 market. Okay, so it's not a super small town, but it's a once was town. It's a city, that once was. And I live on the outskirts of it, but in a neighborhood area that's more or less run down. But the real estate is so cheap and the taxes are so cheap that my house, insurance, and mortgage are a third of what I was paying rent for about 5 years ago when I was living in a more expensive area. So that has allowed me and allowed me over time to basically like retire and write, I write books and make beat poetry tracks and stuff. In other words, the amount of money that I need in order to survive and pay my bills is nominal. And look at this parsley. I mean, and all of this stuff, everything you see here is grown from a seed that's a speck that if you saw it on the ground, you wouldn't even know it was a seed. A tiny thing. And I've been eating this from this backyard of plenty for 6 months now. And there's no end in sight because things like parsley and kale they'll actually survive through the winter. I mean, I'll be picking parsley and kale into November. And I've got, I haven't pulled my carrots yet. I did pull out my potatoes, and I've got them sitting in my refrigerator. And I've got these squashes. I guess they're butternut squashes. I'm not sure if they're butternut squash. It looks like it's another hybrid. I plant my own seeds, and so what happens is when you do that, depending on how the pollination goes, if you have, say, zucchini and summer squash and butternut squash, depending on what the bees do and how they pollinate, sometimes you get these cross-pollinated and you get these hybrid plants. Well, anyway, I've got these squashes that are growing now that are delicious. And I'm filling a basket of them now because they're just coming out a lot more right now. And I'll be making everything from like stir fries to soups to stews, for well into the winter with that. The same with the potatoes and the carrots. So, you could almost live year round from your garden. It doesn't take an awful lot of work either. Some people make it seem like, it's overwhelming to do this, but it's really not. I mean, it's kind of fun. You spend, nice days hanging out in the outdoors, breathing fresh air, catching rays, getting a tan, listening to music, just pulling weeds, doing stuff like that. I don't know. It's cool. It's fun. But what I'm saying is the cost of living in these areas is next to nothing. And the people, getting back to this idea of this homogenized culture because of mass communications, people pretty much are the same as, there was one time where you would go to like New York and, there would be, you would say, well, there's a certain level of sophistication, in New York because they're well read. They read the New York Times or like, I lived in D.C. and Capitol Hill, and that was like the political class, and you had the Washington Post. But the New York Times and the Washington Post are just like rags these days. And as far as the politicians, those cities are, they're dumps. Yeah, they still, I mean, if you want to go to a great museum or galleries, this obviously the big city centers, have that culturally. But beyond that, everything else from entertainment, transportation, culture in general, and the mindset of the people in various communities throughout the whole United States is pretty much the same. It's just there's there's this movement, like I guess they want to sandwich everybody in the cities, so they try to like demean people that live outside of the cities. But take it from a guy who's lived, most of my life in the major cultural centers and has been involved in, entertainment, media, culture, and all of that rot. That today you can get it anywhere and do it anywhere. And besides, I was talking mass communications, but now, when you talk about high-speed internet and 4K and, HD TV and stuff, I mean, it doesn't matter where you live. So, yeah, I've got a high-speed internet connection, and I can upload this video fairly quickly. So, life is pretty darn good. And, and I have the freedom to do what I want to do instead of having to deal, with some idiot telling me what to do or not liking where I live or feeling safe or overpaying or doing some crap job. But to get here, I didn't just run to it. In my case, I went online to real estate sites like a Zillow. There's there's different places like that. Some people even use Craigslist, I think. But I just was shopping. I knew some areas that I thought I had somewhat familiarity with. And I was just looking online, and I found a few places. This place I live in now wasn't my first choice. There were two other places. My first choice, apparently someone had the house right before I was ready to buy it. Someone had, these people, when these houses are abandoned, and this happens anywhere from, it could be in nice neighborhoods or bad neighborhoods, New York City or Poughkeepsie. Someone, right before I was like ready to go there, I was meeting with the realtor. We were about ready to start closing on it. Someone had gone in and stole the copper pipes, ripped the pipes out. People do that when there's buildings sitting empty. And that house I really wanted. And there was another house that was like a brick house that had like a real neat porch. I forget why I didn't get that one. But anyway, this was my third choice. I actually never came to the house. I saw the photos online on this site. I contacted the realtor. I had the realtor. There were some areas of questions I had, so I had a nice enough realtor guy. Asked him to take a couple close-ups of some things that I was curious about. And, over the course, getting a mortgage is not an easy thing. Even if you have decent credit, the whole process still takes you a month or two sometimes. It's really weird. But once I decided I was going to get it, and, I started to get the water changed into my name and things like that, and plan the moving process. But I mean, I had made up my mind that I was going to get out of the apartment I was living in. And I made that, I did that a couple of months before that even. And then I started looking, and then I started working on it. And so, by the time I may have started, I think it was like, I may have started in January or over the holidays even the previous year. So it could have been even November, December-ish. I made up my mind I was going to move. And I don't think I actually physically moved into my place until like this time of year, late September, or maybe it was the 1st of October, I forget. So I planned this out almost a year in advance. But that's what I'm trying to say, is that if you're unhappy, it starts with a list. And then you keep refining that list, and then a list. Once you look at a list and go, you know what, the reason I'm unhappy it's because this job or it's this place I'm living. So the next step is that's what your list is going to tell you. And once you know that, then it's a matter of you start doing some other things where you start looking at areas or places or other jobs that would make you happy. And that's like your second list after the first list. This is a little, these are some flowers that I plucked because I got to trim back, like I was saying, this mutant marigold plant. Look how big those flowers are. And so I trimmed back the plant, and these were some decent ones that I didn't want to throw them away because they were still good. So I put them in some water with a little dash of some plant food. They should. In fact, the bees, while I was laying in the sun earlier today, the bees were actually coming to this. This is outside. Bees were coming over to this little bouquet of sorts and just, getting their pollen on it. It was kind of funny. I was hoping to capture one for this video, but unfortunately the bees were like not as active as these little mothy butterfly things that are all over the place. But that would be a nice, I grew those things from, like I said, last year's seeds, and there's so many of those things all over my yard. So if you're one of these people that's into flowers, you could have fresh flowers on your table or kitchen area or whatever every day for months. And then for some people that brings them happiness. On the left-hand side is more parsley and oregano growing wild and out of control. So you've started a list where you've said what your likes and dislikes are, what makes you happy, what makes you unhappy. You found out that maybe you're unhappy, and then you started to say, well, what you looked at what it is that would make you happy, and so now you're going to search and find a place or a position where you can find happiness, or that's better than where you are. And depending on the age, it doesn't have to be the final move of your life. Actually, there is a bee, looks like, in there. I didn't see that before. A slow-mo, it's like stuffed back in there. I think it's a bee, unless it's a fly. I doubt it. So, and that's the beauty of the internet and all these various sites. You can just create resumes online, look for jobs. You could look through property. And I highly recommend buying property. I mean, I'm going to say it right now. I mean, this is insane. The house that I purchased was originally listed for like $19,000. I know it sounds crazy. This houses in my neighborhood are selling for $20,000 range. But the house didn't sell. People weren't buying them because people are obsessed with having these aluminum siding, weird homes, in developments that all look the same, that cookie cutter lifestyle, and in these weird houses they pay $150,000 to, $250,000 for. And so these neighborhoods with these houses that are older houses, but they're still fine, are like nobody wants to move in them. And so they sell. And so if you find these areas that are, in these secondary or tertiary markets, you find a house for $20,000. So anyway, this house wasn't selling, and the person wanted, I guess the guy who lived here passed on, and so the family that had the house wanted to get rid of it, and so they lowered the price to like $15,000. And my realtor, without me even asking him, got them down to $12,000. So I bought this house for $12,000. So I only had to put a couple $1,000 down payment. And my payments, like for taxes, insurance, and everything, are under $200 a month. Imagine that, under $200 a month. So that would be like, that's your rent, because that includes, taxes, insurance, and the mortgage. It's under $200. And, and even if this house was more, if it was 20 or $30,000 or whatever, and you could find tons of houses like that, your mortgage would still only be like $250 or something like that. So the idea of renting is foolish, because owning is just, it's your own plot of land. And you can own for a third of what you're paying rent for, and without anybody answering to nobody. It's your place. You could do whatever you want to. You know, I knocked out I my upstairs bathroom was a little bit too small. I wanted to the sink. I wanted to put in a. It had a sink like kind of just attached to the wall, the way a lot of older houses do. And so I wanted to put in a like a vanity type of sink, more room to set things on, whatever. So I just had to knock out. I knocked out the wall myself, you know, and just took, went into the adjoining room, which was a back bedroom, about, I don't know, about a foot, just to give enough room so I could add this vanity, which I just bought for like less than $100. And it was really not a big deal doing it. I'm no master carpenter either. But, I do things. But it's your house, so you can mess around with it. And you can have a wall open for a while because it's your place and who cares? So, and as far as finding work, it's a gig economy. If you're lucky enough, you could just, if your payments and expenses are so low that you only need less than $1,000 a month, to live, or even half that, $500. There's very little work you really have to do. And if you're getting your food, basically growing your food, and I don't know, it's it's just amazing. Well, anyway, so that's like my story. That's what I'm doing, and I've been doing this for about almost 5 years now, and I've written like 7 books. They're not big books, and I've written about, I don't know, 3 dozen beat poetry tracks. About a couple dozen of them I think are pretty good tunes. Go to my site, rockflux.com. Listen to them. But happiness is not that elusive if you make up your mind and you plan it and think it out. It may take you a year to get out of the situations you're in right now, or out of the place, and it may take some planning and patience, but you can do it. And it may not be your final destination. For me, this is it. I mean, I found this place. I'm happy here. This is fine. uh, you know but for someone else, they might do it for a few years and find a better place. But the point is, with expenses this low, and you can do that and give yourself the chance to better yourself, or till something better comes along, and have a chance to chill and be happy and all of that sort of thing. So we go back to these elitist politicians and news anchors, so-called reporters, and people in the entertainment business. And anytime you turn on anything, they're on there, and this like, they hate, we need to get this guy, we need this, that. But all they're doing is spewing hatred of a personality or a political ideology. They're not like saying, we must stop end homelessness. You see? We must, help these poor people. Even with like immigration and stuff, they're saying we need open borders. But they're not saying we must stop those coyotes, they call them, who are human trafficking women and children and raping them and stuff like that. They're not saying that. They're saying, no, we just need open borders, so let them. They're not saying we have to stop the drug cartels from killing people and bringing in heroin and, fentanyl and all this garbage, or stop the gangs from killing people and beating these people and stabbing them and kicking people to death. That's not what their angry or hatred is about. They're just saying, we just don't like the other side. We don't like, you see, it's politics of hate by unhappy, seemingly unhappy people who are multimillionaires and have dream jobs and are living in like gorgeous places and in the Hamptons, Cape Cod, the view, Ocean View, Park Avenue, you know, Park View or Ocean. I know because I've lived in all those places, and believe me, when I was there, I was happy. And quite frankly, I didn't even care who the president was or what was going on because I was happy, you know? So that's just something I wanted to point out. I look at these people and I go, you know, why are people so angry and unhappy? Because of a president? They lost the presidency? Or, I mean, that's meaningless things. Presidents, every 4 and 8 years is a new president. It seems to go back and forth from political party. Who cares? You know? The sun's still shining. It's a beautiful day. You can do whatever you want to with your life. And don't let anyone, try to brainwash you or mess with your head. Like as if, the world's going to end in 12 years because of climate change. Climate change. Yeah, the climate changes all the time. They don't say global warming anymore because they found out statistically it's not global warming. So now they just say climate change. Well, yeah, the climate's changing right now. We're going from summer to fall. The sun controls the weather. Take it from me, I spend most of my time outdoor. I grow things. I'm around plants. The sky is bluer than blue right now. The air is fresher than fresh. And the plants are blooming and growing. Great. It's like people who talk about we got to get rid of all these fossil fuels. Do you know that you cannot run, for example, assuming I bought into this whole, I call it a hoax, this whole crazy political carbon tax is what it really is. But say I bought into it and I agreed with Al Gore, even though he's been disproven because years ago, none of his stuff ever came to fruition. But say I was that and I agreed with that. The problem is our civilization is a carbon-based civilization and we're carbon-based creatures. Okay? And, there are things called heavy equipment, like machines that build houses, repair houses, fire trucks that, like, for these people that live in the cities who seem to be the most, like, global climate people. Well, if there's a fire and you need a hook and ladder, you can't run that truck on anything but fossil fuels, right? Farming equipment, everything. Everything that our society runs on, those windmills, to build a windmill, to raise a windmill, requires heavy equipment that requires like levels of torque and power that can only be produced by fossil fuels. There is no alternative. And like this is always missing. Jets, planes, you can't fly them. Do you ever see the solar plane that they did? It's like this flimsy little glider thing. You can't fly jets and, airlines can't run on anything but fossil fuels. It's crazy. Big trucks, anything. Some of the bigger SUVs cannot be run on electric. But more importantly, it's the heavy equipment. It's the stuff that makes our society run that is just totally just being ignored. So, I mean, that's tangential to this whole discussion, but it's not because there's a lot of anger by these people. They always bring up climate change and we've got open borders. And I always say, you're not thinking straight. Forget that. Look at the beautiful world we live in. All right? Look at the beautiful creatures. Look at the beautiful people there are. You know, it's a beautiful world if you allow yourself to see it, to live in it, to embrace it, and stop being angry. Find happiness. It's easier than you think. Make the decision to be a happy person, not an angry, bitter person. And if there are issues that you want to work towards, work with people on them. Don't be partisan. Don't be hateful. You know? Anyway, that's it. I hope you're all happy and I hope you all find happiness. This is my beautiful little piece of happiness that I've carved out for myself in my backyard. Take care. Visit rockflux.com. Buy a shirt. Help support the channel, as they say. Take care.